Hello everyone, and once again, welcome to my video. I'll start as I always do by hoping that each of your families are doing well and that you're having a wonderful week. For my persuasive speech, I wanted to present a more radical subject and offer my own solution to police violence against minorities. I plan on sharing common knowledge as reported by multiple media outlets pertaining to the most current events to be able to create background. I'll follow that by introducing the Black Lives Matter movement and share some of their statistics that brought about the movement we see today. Lastly, I plan on sharing my own approach to this issue, followed by my own persuasion as to why this will work and why we can no longer settle for the status quo. The majority of the information I will share represent data collected from various news agencies, journals, and books. I understand that this will be a very sensitive subject, but I'd like to invite you to approach the subject as I have, with an open mind and an open heart and a humanitarian interest. I also strongly encourage you to conduct your own research on this subject so that you too can be a part of this change. Let's get started. I'd like to begin by asking you to take a moment to envision yourself going through a normal day on one of your normal duties, like going to the grocery store, driving your kids to school, or heading out to a nice dinner. On your way home, you hear a police siren and you see those flashing police lights and a police officer asking you to pull over to the side of the road. Take a moment to think about why you're being pulled over. Were you speeding? Did you change lanes without signaling? Is your taillight out? Or, if you're like me, is your vehicle registration expired and you just didn't change out your tags? While you think about all this, envision a second police vehicle approaching the front of your vehicle, cutting off any chance of escape. And now there are 4 police officers that have your car surrounded. What's your mindset now? Are you still thinking about why you've been pulled over? Are you perhaps intimidated by the 4 white men approaching your vehicle? You have no reason to be scared, right? After all, to the best of your knowledge, you've done nothing wrong. The lead officer now orders you to lower your weapon and show your hands. Are you panicked now? The 4 officers all have their guns on their holsters. What happens next has absolutely nothing to do with what you can control. You're a fine citizen. The worst type of legal trouble you've ever been involved in is when you disputed a parking ticket. However, if you're a black man between the ages of 20 and 40 years old, you face a significantly higher chance of not making it home today. Specifically, you're 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer if you're African American compared to being white. Thanks for participating in that minor role play. I appreciate the open-mindedness towards the subject. In order to understand what I'm proposing, it's important to understand why change is needed. While our role play was entirely fictional, the same cannot be said for both George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. For both of these people, their lives were ended by the same people we trust with our safety. For George Floyd, his life came to an end when a uniformed police officer, with the aid of 3 other uniformed police officers, rested his knee on the back of his neck for 8 minutes and 24 seconds, attempting to subdue someone that was being considered a possible suspect in an investigation involving the distribution of a fake $20 bill. George Floyd was not armed at the time of his death. The officer, Derek Chauvin, was charged with second-degree murder. Yeah, that police officer who has been indicted for murder will have an opportunity to defend himself in open court before judgment is laid upon him by a judge and or members of a jury. Breonna Taylor was asleep when police officers executed a no-knock warrant in her home. A no-knock warrant is a practice that was legal at the time of her death, but is now illegal in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Unlike the alleged murder of George Floyd, there were no eyewitnesses or evidence from body cameras to use. However, the Louisville Police Department has fired Brett Hankinson for blindly firing 10 rounds of his weapon during the execution of the warrant. No arrests have been made. Brett Hankinson gets to sleep in his home tonight. He is currently appealing his termination from the Louisville Police Department. You may not have known either George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, but given the information shared around their killings, the word injustice comes to mind. Unfortunately for our society, the stories of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were not the first of their kind, and perhaps even more tragic is the thought that these stories will not be the last of their kind. In opposition to the murder of unarmed black men and women by police officers, protests have ensued across our country and throughout the world. The largest organization known to spearhead these peaceful protests is the Black Lives Matter organization. They stand and march firmly against social justice and police brutality. Specifically, they remain committed to bringing awareness to deliberate violence inflicted on black people by police officers. To understand their frustration and their agony, we must also look at the numbers that they're facing. Since January of 2015, 4,728 people have died in police shootings. Of these, nearly 50% of them were white and approximately 26% of them were black. Where the number gets frustrating is when you realize that the United States population is 50% white, but only 13% black. It's disturbing to think that one person or a group of police officers have taken nearly 5,000 souls in the last 5 years. What's troubling is that among the number of black people killed, an overwhelming number of them were not armed. Numbers like this call into question the very foundation of the police department and severely damages the trust in law enforcement by a large number of citizens. There have been many calls for reform against police departments, and many have even called for police departments to be defunded altogether. While the Black Lives Matter movement has gained significant traction among local and national media levels, there's still a strong base of support for police departments, and this creates a very divisive tension. In an attempt to make sense of all this, I've come to the conclusion that there must be reform in the police department. After much consideration, I came up with the following changes to avoid completely having to defund a police department. First, relocate the funding for any riot equipment and or armored vehicles such as tanks or crowd controlling vehicles, and reallocate that towards training and community outreach. For example, in the city of Los Angeles, there's been a big effort made to link the LAPD with the community as part of the Community Relations Department. They take funding that's meant for LAPD's budget and they reinvest that into the community that they're sworn to protect. 2, require that all officers have a body camera at all times. Like many jobs today, oversight is a crucial part of success. Any police officer who is being paid by tax dollars should have nothing to hide in their daily shift and have no problem with wearing a body camera. Lastly, create an approval system for any officer to be able to access a weapon of lethal force. I understand that a police officer's job is difficult, and I respect wholeheartedly anybody who lays their life on the line to make a living. That being said, a police officer's job is to protect us, not to end a life. Officers should be armed with non-lethal weapons such as chemical sprays or electronic stun guns that are meant to quickly disable a suspect. If an officer, for any reason, is to unclip his or her lethal weapon from its holster, that officer should go on immediate leave pending an investigation. This should also include investigations surrounding excessive force complaints. Now, before all of this is quickly dismissed as a radical move that's simply impossible, I invite you to have a look across the pond at our parent country in Great Britain, where the vast majority of police officers are not armed. In London, for example, their police department is founded on the principle that policing is done by consent and not done by force. So the notion of an officer carrying a firearm completely contradicts this. As an average citizen who too often finds himself fortunate not to be black, it's obvious that our system of law enforcement is not working for all. According to our Constitution, every man, woman, and child is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. This means that any criminal breaking the law in this country should have the right to legal representation and his or her day in court. Nearly 5,000 American people were never afforded the right to a fair trial through our justice system. Instead, the police officers in one moment became another human being's judge, jury, and executioner. Only God should have the power to instantaneously issue judgment and end somebody's life. What's worse is that the majority of killings by police officers have been protected under stringent laws that were created to keep officers safe. In closing, with little to no oversight or change to their current policy, I fear that this type of violence will only rise, and with it, escalate racial tensions in our country. For this reason, I hope I've inspired you to encourage police reform in your community as well. Once again, I'd like to thank you for your time and for having an open mind towards this subject. If I read the syllabus correctly, this is the last video we're required to post, and so I'd also like to take a moment to wish you the very best in your collegiate career and in life in general. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.